But my hunch right now is if it's Trump versus Biden, Trump would probably win the general election.
Fred De Fossard, who's a former UK special advisor now at the Legatum Institute, which has a unit dedicated to the special relationship, is live with us to think about the US side of things, because of course they're going to the polls as well in November. A bit easier to call, would you say? Less easy to call, the exact opposite. What's going to be happening in the US, do you think?
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me on. I think that there are two stages to this election in the United States, obviously. There is the primary stage, where the Republican Party is going through their selection, and then the general election. It is overwhelmingly likely that Donald Trump will secure the Republican Party nomination. If you look at opinion polls at the moment, he is currently around 60% compared to Ron DeSantis around 11 and Nikki Haley around 9 or 10. And Trump's numbers on the primary when it comes to the primary are actually increasing, and the others are trending down. So he looks like he is unbelievably likely to secure the primary nomination right now. And then when it comes to the general election in November, the picture is kind of mixed. But if you're looking at the matchup with Trump versus Biden specifically, I think it looks more likely than not that Trump would win in a head-to-head. So you have opinion pollsters like JL Partners, who did some work with the Daily Mail recently, that put Trump about 5 points ahead of Biden. YouGov has put Trump ahead of Biden in many cases. But then there is a large sweep of polls which put them a little bit closer. But my hunch right now is if it's Trump versus Biden, Trump would probably win the general election.
And what is the issue with the Biden campaign? Because the Washington Post had a piece, I think last week, where they were suggesting that Joe Biden himself is now asking some of those around him, what is going wrong? Why can't we get a break in this long campaign? Is there a clear issue beyond the things you hear about, oh, he's just a bit too old?
That's a great question. It's a very interesting paradox because in many respects, especially from a British point of view, the American economy is pretty booming.
Yeah.
As we all know, that living standards for middle-class Americans are outstripping those of British and Europeans, like left, right and centre. It's quite amazing. But some of the big, huge pieces of policy that were trumpeted around the world are not quite coming home to roost. So the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, these big components of like Biden industrial strategy, which we were told were going to revolutionise industrial strategy in the United States, are actually not bearing fruit, and people are worried that they're going to be actually a great big waste of money in places. Inflation was very high in the United States, but it has come down. But it does seem to be this long-running dissatisfaction, potentially as an after effect of the pandemic and the economic effects of it. But I think that from the general election in America in 2020. American politics is very, very divided. And Joe Biden is not a unifying president and has not governed as such.
Yes. Are people in the UK doing enough pricing in of a Trump victory? Because whatever you think about him, it's definitely going to shake things up. And I think it was a few weeks ago that our own William Hague was writing in the Times that actually institutions in the UK need to wake up to that fact, and in the West, and do some planning.
I think you're entirely right. That's a very good question, and I do think that there is an assumption that because of the sort of disasters that happened in January 2020, the reports of the prosecutions against him and how these are rolling, and then the Colorado Supreme Court, and then followed by the Maine Supreme Court, like taking him off the ballot or saying that he's not fit to run for office. There is an assumption among some quarters in the United Kingdom that he is just somehow never going to become president again. I think that's slightly naive, and I think that particularly when it comes to the cases like the Colorado Supreme Court, the evidence on which they made the decision to remove him from the ballot will probably be overturned and struck down by the United States Supreme Court before the general election anyway.
Yes. And is it clear, though, that people in the UK, organisations, governments, businesses, is there anything they can do to awaiting a future Trump presidency?
So, we've had President Trump before, between 2016 and 2020, and he had it led to a sort of haphazard relationship with the United Kingdom. It wasn't a bad one. He brands himself as a great Anglophile. He always talks about his love of Scotland through his mother, which I do think is genuine. But then at the same time, he put steel tariffs on the moment he became president, which was very bad for the British economy. But then the other side of it is he was keen to negotiate a free trade deal. So I think that he is a particularly contradictory politician, and there's areas in which Britain will be able to work with him, and there are areas which Britain won't be able to work with him or find it more difficult. But then the same is kind of true of Biden. Like Biden has worn on his sleeve his sort of dislike of Britain in some places, but at the same time, we did the AUKUS submarine defence agreement with the United States, Australia, and the UK, which is one of the most important pieces of foreign policy Britain has done for years, and that was done between Boris Johnson and Joe Biden, politicians that we were told didn't really like each other. So a little bit like with Donald Trump's relationship with the United Kingdom, there are always ways in which the special relationship actually quite endures. Ignore some of the sort of hostile briefings between, White House and Downing Street. Often there is a great level of cooperation, particularly on defence and security. Although I do think it would be interesting to see how a Keir Starmer-led British government would get on with a Donald Trump-led United States government.
Yes, well, we'll leave that for 2025. Fred De Fossard, thanks very much for coming in. Good to talk to you. He's a former UK Special Advisor, now at the Legatum Institute there at Special Relationship Unit.